This phrase, Mycenaean civilization, refers to the Bronze Age in what we think of as Greece today. So we could say the Bronze Age in ancient Greece. Now I'm going to have a lot more to say about the development of civilization in ancient Greece at a later point. All I'm doing here is introducing you to Mycenaean Greece, and I'm doing that to kind of give you a little bit of background for you to learn about the collapse of Bronze Age civilizations. And so in this unit, I'm giving you a brief overview of a handful of them. Mycenaean civilization takes its name from the first city that we uncovered from Bronze Age Greece, the city of Mycenae, and I'll point that out to you when we get to it. Just like with the Ugaritic civilization, just like with Harappan civilization, the first city that we have found from this time period gives the entire time period its name. Mycenaean Greece is the setting for the stories that come to us out of Homer, and out of a number of Greek legends are set back in Mycenaean Greece. So we can think of Mycenaean Greece as the age of Homer, also the age of Odysseus and some of the other legends that come out of Greek folklore and mythology and legends and so on, the age of Homer. I'll be saying a little bit more about these, the works of Homer later, although not an awful lot. The Iliad, you may have come across Homer's works before anyway. The Iliad is the story of a war between the Mycenaean Greeks and the city of Troy. And the Odyssey is the story of a journey home from that war. But when we think about the Bronze Age warriors of ancient Greece, we think about Homeric Greece, and we're thinking about Mycenaean Greece. One guy who thought an awful lot about Mycenaean Greece and about the age of Homer was a fellow that Gombrich mentions to you, a man named Heinrich Schliemann. Schliemann is an interesting character. He's an archaeologist. He is a writer. He's kind of an oddball, kind of a little nutty, a little strange, but well, certainly very interesting. Gombrich mentions him to you. He was convinced that the stories of Homer had actually happened, or that at least the settings were real. At the time that Schliemann is alive, during the latter part of the 19th century, well, just about everything from the ancient world was seen as mythological and false and fictional and all that kind of stuff. But Schliemann was convinced that there really was an age of Homer. I mean, whether Homer himself really described what actually happened, I'm not exactly saying that, but that the setting of the Homeric stories was real. In the late 19th century, everything from the ancient world was just called false and fictional and phony and all that kind of stuff. But Schliemann was convinced that Mycenaean Greece really did exist the way that Homer described it. And he made his fortune in business, and then he set off to Greece to try to dig up and discover Mycenaean Greece. The first city that he discovered, and let me try to get my pointer going here, was the city of Mycenae, down here. If you happen, let me get myself out of the way, kind of blocking the story there. Okay. Well, let me give you some vocabulary here. Here we have the Aegean Sea. That is the sea between where Greece and Turkey is today, where Greece and Anatolia were, to use ancient words. If you're familiar with Homer, Mycenae is the city where Agamemnon lived. If that means something to you, then it means something to you, and if it doesn't, then it doesn't. Don't worry about it too much for this course. But if you've taken a mythology course, you may know the story of Agamemnon. That's where he lived. Schliemann digs up, or at least his laborers dig up, the city of Mycenae, and then he sets out to discover Troy. Now here's where Schliemann is kind of an oddball, all right? But he gets in a boat. He sails to where he thinks Troy might have been. Okay? He gets out of the boat. Troy is up here. He gets out of the boat and he reads Homer's Iliad, and he reads how far the city walls are from the beach. And so he measures out that distance. And then in Homer's Iliad, a Greek warrior named Achilles rides a chariot around the city. And Homer tells us how long in time it took for Achilles to ride his horse around the city. And so Schliemann does some math and figures out how long it would take him to run as far, I should say, as a horse would run around the city. And so he measures out from the beach to where he thinks the walls would have been, and then he sets out running, and he runs in a circle as long as it would take for a human to run as long as Achilles' horse had been ridden. And then he tells his laborers, dig right here, here's where the walls are. Well, Schliemann, besides being an oddball, was also very lucky because he just happened to have landed right where Troy was, and his oddball method of discovering the walls of Troy worked, and in fact, the walls of Troy were discovered, and in fact, they had been destroyed by fire, or damaged by fire, in the same way that Homer described them. So Schliemann was very, very happy about that. Well, as we look at this map, back to kind of more serious stuff, down here we have Minoan civilization in purple. That would, of course, include Crete. You see Knossos here. That would also, I know on your screens you may not be able to make it out, but that would include the island of Thera up here. That's where that large volcano was that went off and destroyed, or buried, literally buried Crete. Also up through here, over into here, and then back down through there. So actually, yeah, that is purple over there too. Okay. Not that it's a big deal. The pinkish areas that you see are what we think of as Mycenaean Greece. The Mycenaean people were a civilized people. By now you know what that means. They lived in cities. I've already pointed out to you several of their cities. And here we have examples of Mycenaean written language. And another example here in clay. Oh, let me get myself out of the way again. There I go, cluttering stuff up. Let's back up so you can see that a little bit better with me out of the way now. And here, we call Mycenaean Greek Linear B to distinguish it from Linear A, which we associate with Minoan civilization. You may remember that today we can't read Linear A. Nobody's been able to decipher it yet, at least. Linear B we're able to read. We're able to decipher and to read Linear B Greek. The Mycenaeans went through an interesting process in developing a written language. We have early examples of Mycenaean writing which use ideograms, but now you know what that means. And then when they got to phonograms, they did not go to a purely phonetic alphabet like you and I might picture, like English works, but instead to a syllabic alphabet, where instead of individual sounds, different characters, different marks represent different syllable sounds. And if you're interested, and only if you're interested, you can push pause or come back to this chart and take a look at it and figure out how the language worked. I'm obviously not going to quiz you on these on the phonetic values of these marks, but you can see how a syllabic language would work. It's interesting that we haven't gotten to them yet, but the Mayans in Mesoamerica will develop a very similar system of a written language, which is just kind of interesting. It's another approach to using an alphabet. Here we have, I think it's about 60 characters that each represent a sound of a syllable. Well, I'm going to show you some photographs that come out of Mycenae just to wrap us up here quickly. The Mycenaeans built walls around their cities. That's unlike the Minoans. And so that indicates to us that they were afraid of being invaded from the outside, and also indicates to us, as Homer does in writing, that they feared being attacked by other cities within Mycenaean Greece as well. That's not the story we see at Knossos, and the presentation will give you one theory about why that might be the case. We're looking at one entrance gate into Mycenae. It's called the Lion's Gate. If you look up at the top of the gate, over the gate, you will see the two lions there. Try to zoom in on the picture. That's a little bit blurry for you, isn't it? But this is much better. And you see at least the bodies of the lions, if the heads have been removed there. Another thing to associate with Mycenaean Greece are these death masks. They are very thin gold, not exactly gold foil, but very thin gold, which is then pounded out into a face, which is supposed to represent the face of the dead person. And then the mask is tied onto the head of the dead body before it is buried. If you look at this example, you'll see some holes over here behind the ears, and again over here where you would put some leather string stuff or something to be able to tie the golden mask behind the head. This particular mask, there we go, get rid of the ugly ink stuff. This particular mask, Schliemann was convinced was Agamemnon's own death mask. It's since been dated to using maybe carbon date, some kind of radioactive dating. I'm unclear myself. Anyway, much later than Agamemnon would have been alive. But Schliemann was convinced he had found Agamemnon's very own death mask, and this was it. I've got some others here just for you to look at. This one, kind of a happy guy, I guess. And this one, a very simple mask considering. You may be able to make out those holes there on the sides where it would have been tied behind the man's head. Well, that's just a brief look at Mycenae, and we're going to be saying an awful lot more about the development of civilization in ancient Greece at a later point, but I want to prepare you for what we're talking about this week.